Hey, g'day. Welcome to the ATP Project. Today is a very special episode because finally got rid of Jeff and Steve. And we've got Nick and Dan. Much better looking and much more fun, I'm sure. In today's episode, the cool thing is we've got 4 naturopaths in the room. So we're going to have a cool episode and talk a little bit about what a naturopath is, what a naturopath does, what type of person comes to see a naturopath, why we exist, and how we can help. So in today's episode, I reckon we're going to run through some really cool stuff. We're going to hopefully relate it to yourself and understand where you sit in the naturopathic world and how we can help you. I reckon it's going to be pretty cool. So just want to introduce everyone on the panel today. We shouldn't say panel because it's kind of cool because there's 4. With a panel. So we've got Nick. Do not call her Nicole. She hates it. Okay? So we've got Nick, and Nick's going to tell us a little bit about herself. We've got Dan. So I did choose to keep them with male names, Nick and Dan, just for the balance. And we've got Elisma. Now, so we went through the discussion earlier about how we like to be, and I'm Matt. I don't like Matilda. But so today's show, just before it, we're talking about, because Elisma, I call her Elisma sometimes, I call her Elisma sometimes. And that's based on this, anyone heard the 50-50-90 rule? It's one of Murphy's laws. So whenever you've got a 50-50 chance of picking the right one, there's a 90% chance you'll pick the wrong one. And so what happens, I constantly get this thing stuck in my head where I think it's this, but then my brain goes, no, it's probably the other one. And then last minute I switch. So it's Elisma from now on.
Yes, right. That's right.
All right, so let's run around the table. We all know Elisma. Elisma's been on a few shows now. She's getting boring. So, Nick, tell us about yourself.
So I am a naturopath, a nutritionist. I'm a herbalist. Mm-hmm. I spent about 18 or 19 years in the fitness industry. That's sort of where I started my wellness career. Did some competing for a little while. And that's how I actually ended up in becoming a naturopath. So I did the usual, messed up my hormones, messed up my thyroid after 5 years of competing. Couldn't figure out what was going on, went through the medical profession, and they just wanted to do, pharmaceuticals and that sort of thing, which I didn't feel comfortable with. So started doing a lot of my own research on my health, and that led me to natural medicine, which then led me on to studying and becoming a naturopath just because I loved it. I love the ethos of natural medicine and just being able to help people to rebalance themselves. So that's how I ended up where I am.
Sweet. Yeah, Dan, what's your story? How did you become a naturopath and why?
Well, I studied nutritional medicine, so I did a Bachelor of Nutritional Medicine at Endeavour College. Yep. And I guess similar to Nick, I sort of found myself feeling a bit failed by the medical system in my journey, especially not going down the path of things, taking the pill or anything like that. And so I found myself at Endeavour College. I really just wanted to be able to help other people. That was always my first passion. So I just wanted to be able to share my knowledge to help other people. So after study, I actually ended up in technical support. And that's where I was exposed to the world of functional testing, which, as I'm sure Elizabeth knows, is just never ending. Yeah. So I really was able to sink my teeth into so many different functional testing options for hormones, stool testing, whatever that might be. And I love that tech side. So yeah, and that's what's led me here to ATP, which has been a dream come true. And yeah, I'm just happy to share that with other people.
Yeah. Elizabeth, why did you become a naturopath? Was it?
Well,
I never asked you, I don't think.
No. So it was actually, when I was maybe 16 years old, I was still living in South Africa at that stage. My dad actually had a heart attack, and they wanted him to be in hospital, said he needed triple bypass surgery, and he's like, no, I've got a holiday booked with my family, I'm going on holiday. So be that as it may, my mum took him to a naturopath there. So it's a little bit different in South Africa. It's a bit more, there's a lot of pharmacists in South Africa who become naturopaths. So this was a pharmacist who turned into a naturopath. Mm-hmm. So he did the herbal concoctions and some tissue salts and things like that, more the celluloids. Anyway, long story short, my dad came really good, and we went on a holiday, and that really stuck by me. So my mum was always into the natural stuff. Even when I was a baby, she used to treat me with homeopathy and things like that. So it was just like, oh, this is interesting. I'd like to do this. And I remember, it's funny actually, because I got a bursary for dentistry. I never showed up at the uni for dentistry. I showed up at the uni for naturopathy, and And, later in life, when I saw how much money the dentists were making, I thought, God, I should have gone to dentist work. But, other than that, studied in South Africa, came here, continued studies, and I've seen the results, when I was young, and it was like, this is definitely what I want to be doing, helping people.
Yeah.
So that's interesting, because I noticed a pattern. A lot of naturopaths, they'll often get into it because of either a personal health journey that they'd learnt natural medicine could help them, or someone else. But no, I think that's a very fascinating thing. So we often find that every naturopath is different. We were talking earlier, I realised that I was in my final year of study and only a couple of months off graduating before I realised I'd never actually been to a naturopath. My early days was my grandfather helping me with making marigold flower bed to treat my eczema. That got me obsessed with plants, and I used to be obsessed with like the bush tucker man, and I just wanted to do that style of naturopath. Can't do anything of that now. Botany, wildcrafting, never learnt any of it, but end up doing a totally different field. But so I found that every naturopath is different, because before I graduated, I thought I'll go and pop around and see a couple of the best ones that we've all heard about and read about, and see what they're like. They're also very different, Some might use, and a lot of the differences is often revolving around their theranostic tools. Like some people are obsessed with a HemoView, someone might do another, so live blood analysis, someone might do this, other people rely on functional testing. And one of the things I've always hated about naturopaths criticising the medical field is they'll complain, a doctor just does my blood tests and then judges me on my blood tests, and then a lot of naturopaths, but I've got a different machine, and I can judge you on that.
Yeah.
So one thing that we've all got in common is understanding that regardless of what sort of functional testing or diagnostic tools you use, the importance of a symptom picture and the importance of discussion, because ultimately you never treat diseases, you don't treat results, you treat people. So I want to kind of run around the table again and have a chat about, because we've also noticed that we all see the same type of people. And so naturopaths ourselves, regardless of whether you're a hairy bloke like me and that sort of stuff, or a woman and that sort of stuff, we typically see a lot of women. I was a local naturopath in a country town, so they didn't have too much choice. But we often see these women. I personally dodged babies and pregnancy just because I couldn't be bothered to learn about it, and they seemed a bit more sensitive. So I just avoided that. And when I say sensitive, like, I don't want to kill anyone, first do no harm and stuff like that. So I dodged all the little people and the weak people, and I also dodged cancers and all that sort of stuff. I just dodged a lot of the really heavy stuff. Well, no, when I say dodge, I just didn't advertise that I could cure it, like other people would. So obviously they got those people, so... what sort of people do you guys see in the clinic all the time? Like, what is the most common? Because if you just do the demographics and Google, they'll say women 30 to 45. That typical for everyone?
Yeah, I'd say 20 to 50.
Yeah.
I'd probably broaden it a little bit.
50 or 60.
Yeah. So if we have a look through the stage lives for the women, when they first typically, I saw them coming in, the first moment, and you guys kind of alluded to the same journey, that around that puberty time, around that time you might start getting interested, because honestly, in my experience, when people would go through puberty, women would go through puberty and they go to the doctor, the options that a doctor has to manage early stages of puberty and the symptoms of that would basically be giving them the pill or taking... I mean, they're really, with hormones, the doctors have the option of modifying it by taking over with the hormones, removing something, or blocking something. So what do you guys... What sort of things? Is that what you notice?
Definitely. Like a lot of women that I see, a lot of their issues have started, when they started going through puberty. That's when I started noticing some of their symptoms, that then carried over into later life. And I also see a lot of mothers bringing their teenage daughters who have, like, let's say, acne or irregular periods, heavy bleeding, or what have you. Pain is a big one. And so a lot of mums want to do more of the natural stuff with their daughters instead of just putting them on a chemical hormone, so to speak. So a lot of them would first want to try the path of more natural and working with the body. And I think a lot of those girls, if they had good success, will end up, as when they have children, then also going that pathway, taking their kids to naturopaths or nutritionists or whatever, because they see that it works, and why not do something without chemicals if you can, and it works. So, but it's very common that's often a starting point. Yeah.
So what do you do? I mean, honestly, as a naturopath, I mentioned the doctors have the opportunity to just basically give them the pill and take over. And the problems I've seen with that, there's numerous problems apart from the side effects of that, but that's a very important phase of maturity where we're developing totally new parts of our body that are going to carry us through for the rest of our life. So it's not the sort of thing you want to suppress or stall or just put off until another day. How do you do it? How do you do it, Nick?
So, I mean, obviously we go all the way back. As Elizabeth said, we have a look at what's going on. We will test hormones. We do full blood testing to see if we can find anything in there. We look at lifestyle factors, emotional stuff as well, what their environment is like. So they're all of the things. We sort of dig down deep. We don't just look and go, okay, there's a hormonal imbalance, let's treat that. We really dig down really deeply to have a look at anything that's underlying. A lot of times there can be emotional things that are causing sort of hormonal imbalances, bad diets, things like that. So we need to look at all of those factors when we're treating the person.
Definitely.
It's crazy, hey? Like, I mean, you mentioned that you do blood tests and look at the hormones and that sort of stuff. I know there's been different phases where at one stage everyone's saying, saliva is the active, or saliva is the one that we need to do. And I went through a phase of doing all these saliva tests, mainly because as a naturopath, they were easier for me to do. I could get the kits, they could take them home, they could do it. But then every time I got bizarre results, which was quite often, I would then go and do a blood test via the doctor to double check those hormones, and typically do a blood test on day 22 if they had a cycle or something like that. Is that typical of what we would all do?
Well, I'd say you'd be able to answer this really well, Danielle. It's that because you get different answers with the saliva than you do with the blood, and actually doing both, you get a much better picture. So
you do,
cool.
Definitely. And I think with hormones, I agree, Matt, that's where, particularly in the saliva, we find they can fluctuate quite a lot, and even from hour to hour across the day. So when we're taking, so, and that's where I found with hormones, I've really gone that step further in terms of looking more so at urine, because when we're testing through the urine, we're seeing that process of metabolism happen. And that's giving us more of that well-rounded picture to actually say, this is what you're producing and this is how you're metabolizing it in your body. And I would really agree with Elizabeth in terms of when we start to combine the two of urine testing for hormones and then something like pathology in the blood, we're getting the full picture then.
Absolutely.
Do you still do saliva?
I find in terms of saliva, I use it sometimes in terms of cortisol. That would be the hormone that I focus on. So the beauty of doing cortisol in saliva testing is that you see it immediately. So if you want to see, okay, what is someone's cortisol when they wake up in the morning, saliva will give you that.
Oh, that's cool.
So that's where I will still use saliva, but mostly for that more adrenal picture.
But then the saliva gives you the free hormones, right?
Exactly.
And the blood gives you, you can get free or you can get bound.
Exactly.
So I always find it's very interesting to see what's bound to the sex-binding hormone globulin, sex hormone binding globulin, or any of those. And and also the LH and the FSH, which gives you more of that brain communication aspect.
Completely.
For the people out there listening and are hearing these words, the way the hormones are working, and especially coming into puberty and that sort of stuff. So luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone are chemicals that are coming from the pituitary gland in the brain, telling the body to make hormones and do things, So to measure the hormones is one thing, but you need to know if the brain's telling your body to make, because if your hormones are low, we want to know if the brain is not saying anything at all, which is why they're low, or we want to know if the brain's yelling at it and the ovaries are not responding or whatever. So it's really important to get a full hormonal profile, not just measure estrogen on day 22, or someone will just measure progesterone alone. And I'll tell you something that drives me crazy. They never do the same thing all the time. It bugs me. The first test I do, LH, FSH, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, one of those might look weird. The next time they do a follow-up, they only test the one weird one.
Exactly.
And you've got no idea how, and then they go, oh no, it's really bad or something. Now, so I still don't know what the other hormones are doing.
Exactly.
So that's where a good around like covering as many different sorts of diagnostic tools as possible. Furthermore, if you have those results without a symptom picture, they're useless. And that's where the naturopaths, I believe, are a little bit superior in their ability to kind of get a holistic understanding, because there's a massive emphasis on collecting the symptoms and how the person feels and how they're manifesting, that you can then relate back. And those symptoms need to be collected pretty much on the same day you do your test. So we need to know how you're feeling when this is in your blood. Because you don't know if you're resistant to hormones or what.
That's right. But even, sometimes, it's like you said, Matt, sometimes the symptom picture is even more important. I know I had recently a client who, lots of hormonal issues, or let me put it this way, her symptoms were it was very much to do with her cycle. So we did a Dutch test, and I'll be honest, I could not find anything on the Dutch test that really stood out, right? So there was a few little patterns, so we worked on the patterns, didn't really see much change in her symptoms, and I ended up saying to her, right, we're throwing the test out the window. And I went through her symptoms very carefully per her cycle, because she could tell, on this day I feel like this, on this day I feel like this, and it was very pointed. I said, okay, we're going to go on that. Let's forget all the tests, and we're just going to go on your symptoms.
Exactly.
So sometimes, the symptoms is more important than
Completely.
And
the
that's
tests as well.
that's exactly right. A GP will basically treat on a test.
Yeah.
They don't look at the person. And we very often, Dan and I will get clients in and they've got perfect bloods, yet they're feeling terrible. Like, well, there's something obviously wrong. And the GP's sitting there saying, well, your bloods are fine, so you're fine.
Yeah.
Just go home and don't worry about it. But it's not the case. And that's where symptom picture, digging deeper, looking at the big picture, and then we can start to see little spot points joining
And a lot
up.
of it's a process of elimination.
Yeah.
Like the blood's neat,
sure.
sweet. It's not just folate and B12 then. Cool, let's look at something else.
Yeah.
And that reminded me with the saliva, I haven't done saliva hormone tests for over a decade, really. And then, but in the meantime, I've learnt heaps about the gut microbiome, and that there's a thing called the estrobolome, and there's a testrobolome, which are actually colonies of bugs that can make estrogen, make testosterone. Would that change a saliva test to anyone? Do you think it might have something to do with it? I don't know.
I think it definitely would, Matt, because I also
Because I know you can get oral thrush, and like the candida itself could be.
Yeah, that's right.
Before you're manifesting with those full symptoms, you could easily have a changed hormonal profile in your saliva based on your microbiome, huh?
Definitely. And I think it's looking at what came first as well. So in terms of the gut, was there already that imbalance there?
Yeah.
And then we're starting to see those symptom pictures of hormonal imbalances stemming from that. And that's, as Nick was saying, it's a full picture. We're taking in that whole person and everything that is communicating along that axis, I guess.
Yeah.
And that's like what you were saying before, Matt, in terms of that communication, like with the FSH and the LH, that's coming from the brain. And so when you think about something like the HPA axis, so your hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, if there is some level of dysfunction on that axis, we would really start to consider, is that other axis is involved as well? So the HPO, so the ovarian axis, HPT, the thyroid, and they're really all communicating in together. So I think it's really looking at, if we've got one axis that's in dysfunction, we probably start to assume that the others are impacted in some way as well.
Yeah. And have you seen the pattern?
Definitely.
The pattern between the HPT, HPG, HPA. So the thyroid, the gonadal. So thyroid regulates your metabolic rate. It's your pacemaker for your body. It determines how much energy you're burning and how much you're conserving. Your gonadal axis, which is reproduction or shagging for fun. So that's, I couldn't even look at anyone. You know, I just looked straight at the pad when I said shagging for fun. So the gonadal axis is for reproduction and other stuff. Yeah. And then, but the adrenal axis is survival. And so short-term survival, it takes priority. So if the HPA axis is driven by anything, then the other axes will be modified by that. And that's why we always talk about the importance of cortisol. We rabbit on about cortisol, not just because it's evil itself, but it gives us a really good signal to know what's happening. Because basically, if you're under a life-threatening stress, reproduction and shagging for fun. See, I did it again. Is not an option, and so often that's switched off. The thyroid axis is modified during stress. You know, during an acute stress, it might speed up a little bit just to help you, but then chronic stress, it's shut down. So there's some really interesting patterns there, which is what you said at the start. We've got to find out if it started with emotional, what else is going on in their life. And one of the big problems that we see because most of the people that come to the naturopath clinic are women, people like you actually, like you're a typical, you girls are the typical naturopath clients, except you've taken it to the next level where you worked it out yourself. What you'll notice with a woman 20 to 50 years of age and that sort of stuff, that often they might be a mum, which makes them a chief medical officer of every household. They worry and think about everyone else constantly. They got to somehow juggle between being a domestic goddess and a domestic executive. They've got to hover between running their household and all that sort of stuff, and then also still being the woman that they want to be, And I'm so nervous at so much stuff. I really don't want to offend them. All these things, trust me, I'm coming from a position of admiration. Often they're an entrepreneur, but they're also the labour force. Like trying to actually control the HPA axis and the digestive tract and that sort of stuff is probably one of the most important things that a naturopath can teach a woman. Because what you've got to understand is balance. And like, seriously, have you ever had a consultation with a mum that has not brought a list of questions for her friend, her neighbour, her husband, or suggested, is that good for me? Can I give it to my children? Man, seriously.
Yeah.
That's right. A lot of them are also, one of the ones you left out, Matt, is the chef,
Yeah, exactly.
And a lot of the
most
mums,
important job.
The most important job, because a lot of these mums have children with eczema or food intolerances. I mean, food intolerance is a big thing these days. So they have to work out special diets and, fussy kids, special diets, having to feed everyone something different. So there's that added stress of meal preps and all of that kind of stuff as well. So and then with the stress, like how that affects their hormone function, their thyroid function, their energy function. I think you guys were talking about that earlier. Like the big thing that a lot of women come to us for is usually to do with some kind of a stress related
and they'll come in and they'll say, I've got what's going on. I've got gut issues. My period's all out of whack, and I'm just really depressed. And they say, I don't know. They're not related, but I've got all these different things. And you can sit there and say, well, they actually are all related, and they do all come back to stress. Because it's just literally sort of a domino effect.
So in the hierarchy of things, I mean, should we really just be going in and looking at hormones and even considering testing hormones before we look at the holistic lifestyle and sit there and go back and go, in reality, like, because it's one thing to say sit down to eat, but I mean, the reality of it is you've just prepped the meal, you've done all that sort of stuff, you put a lot of love and a lot of effort. After you bought all those groceries, you put a lot of thought into allergens, you put a lot of thought into this kid likes meat, this kid likes vegetables, but we all like starch, it's like good. And then last minute, that kid just wants the blue plate. Will only eat on a bloody blue plate. And then because the other kid got a blue plate, he wants the blue plate. You know what I mean? There's all of that sort of stuff. And then it's that actually eat the food. And then they're sitting there going, no, I've made all this food. I need you to eat it. You need the nutrition. Like, how the hell? It's one thing for me to say, just sit down to eat like the rest of us. Relax. But it's not that easy, So sometimes other little tricks that we can teach mums, not just sitting down to eat, but there's some really wicked studies talking about why people say grace or positive affirmations and just becoming mindful of the meals. And so it's a family thing. Like seriously, unless the family's involved in helping mum's digestive tract to work by being good people around dinner time, like it's such a holistic thing, and it does involve the whole family and everything around. So
I think you raise a good point, Matt. It's like it's not always about testing the hormones, because the hormones get out of whack because of these other environmental factors. So I don't know about you guys, but for me, I will always first look at the fundamentals, which is sleep, circadian rhythms, nutrition, and then what's the relationships like, what's the support of dad or the partner or what have you. And because if you don't sort those things out, you can test and you can throw supplements at someone and they're not really going to get better, unless you get those basic things right.
Definitely.
And then with the symptom picture, trying to work out whether they're in that phase of hyperreactivity of the adrenal axis or if they've gone past that into that exhaustion. This is why it's important to have, if you do testing, always have that symptom picture. Because I don't know if you're resistant to cortisol and it's pumping and really high, or if you're just stressed and that cortisol is fully active and it's just extremely anxious. And so it's all to do with the symptom picture and then working out. So that in that instance, often what I would have done what I do in my naturopath clinic, and I didn't do a huge amount of testing, to be honest. Mainly what I did was work through that symptom picture, work on the hierarchy, work on the priorities, and see if sleep, digestion, adequate nutrition. So what nutrients have you guys found to be extremely important when you're going through that puberty, apart from just iron? Most people assume I need more iron, you know?
I think it's, really coming back to those essential nutrients and minerals, I think, Matt. So things like the zinc, magnesium, selenium,
That's the big ones.
They're the big ones.
See, zinc, every time you're building something or breaking something apart, you're pretty much using zinc. And there's a lot of that going on.
Yeah. And also if you're on a lot of women are on oral contraceptive pill, and that depletes your zinc, your B6, your magnesium.
So what do you do? I mean, because a lot of the times they'll come through to you, they've been to the doctors because of the hormonal problems, and they've been put on a pill, and sometimes they've cycled through a couple of pills. A common thing that you hear in the clinic is, I've been everywhere, I've tried everything, and now I've spent all my money and I've come to you. And then we feel obligated to do it all for free, of course. But discount, you know. So so often you'll find they've tried 2 or 3 different forms of the pill to work out which one works well for them, and they're either got a moderate amount of management or that's not working for them. What do you do with young women that are on the pill, not necessarily for contraception, well, not usually for contraception, but for managing the symptoms? What do you do? Do you work with it? Like, how do you do it? I want to know.
I find that a lot of times we do have to work with it, because you got to remember too, these young girls, they're on it because either they've got skin issues or they've had really painful periods, and they're too scared to come off it because the fear of that coming back is greater than being on the pill.
They may actually be on it for contraception, and that's a little secret.
Exactly. That's right.
Yeah, because the naturopaths get let in on a lot of secrets.
Yes, definitely.
That's true.
Yeah. So you do have to work around that, which makes it a little bit more difficult, but there's still ways we can do it. So it's just, again, a matter of working with the patient and what's going to work for them, and what's going to be most comfortable for them and what's most achievable for them as well.
I think it's looking at those factors I look at it as burden. So what is a burden on those on the systems that we can start to take away? So if there's improvements we can make with their diet, let's do that. So how can we get them to have more nutrients out of their current diet? And those things like the zinc and the B vitamins, can we start with the diet from that aspect and then supplement where we need to on top of that? So I think, and coming back to, as we've all touched on, sleep is so important. If that's a burden in terms of that system, what can we do there? Stress is a huge one. So
it is.
And working on the gut. So I think really coming back to that, if someone's taking the pill, there's still so much work we can do with their gut health, detoxification, liver, all of those sorts of things. So
I want to ask something just a little bit off topic, but how do you guys see many, since we're talking about young women and all of that, see many eating disorder kind of things as well?
I see a lot.
Yeah?
I see a lot, and you get to the point where you can pick them. A lot of times they won't come out with it, but you know the signs, you know the words that they're using, so you can sort of work your way around it. Sometimes I'll just come out and say it and they're really open to it. Other times you've sort of got to work around it, but it's very, very common. Particularly these days with social media and that sort of thing, body image, it's becoming more and more prevalent.
It's a lot of pressure.
And that's definitely going to affect, nutritional status and hormones and things like that as well.
When you say eating disorder, what do you mean? Under eating? Or overeating?
Now
or
I'm talking more about the anorexia and the bulimia thing, which is very,
really.
I think it's
really
more common than people realise.
I would say it's actually very prevalent. Yeah.
It's hard to treat. So much, it's actually, I shouldn't say it's not hard to treat. It's hard to pick the right language to motivate the people to take the supplements.
Yes.
Because if you say the wrong thing, like for example, if you make a comment that it may support lean muscle mass, which is important, they're going, I don't want to bulk up. And then you've got to be very careful of how you use the language, and basically, because the perception is distorted in the sense that what they perceive dysmorphia, basically, they're seeing themselves totally different, and even understanding that they think they're going to manipulate their body so differently by using supplementation. So you've got to be it's so hard to treat, because you can't go through and treat it like a disease. You can't say, this is something we're going to fix, because they're going to go, okay, you're going to try to fatten me up.
Yeah, and it's a very emotional based conditions as well. So you can't sit there and say, well, we're just going to put you on this particular diet, so you're having more calories or more of this and more of that, because we know they're not going to do it. So it's a matter of then, again, working around it and working with them and just doing what's comfortable for them, tiny little changes is what can really make big differences.
I find educating on sarcopenic obesity very useful because when you explain to them that it's a skinny fat, it's not. So what? Because they're not crazy, and you're sitting there going, I know what you're seeing. You're seeing the fat that's left over in the absence of the muscle, and it's a skinny fat. It's a form of thing called a sarcopenia. It comes from I think Greek term meaning tear flesh. So that's where sarcasm comes from, tearing flesh. It's very rude to be sarcastic. Isn't that interesting? So and sarcasm and sarcopenia, it's all along the same lines. But that thing's very important to explain, and then also showing them the benefits of just having a healthy physique and that sort of stuff. There's a lot of really good role models out there now, some of the most amazing physiques that you'll ever see on the social medias, and that started with eating disorders and then got an understanding of how sick skinny fat was. And that skinny fat, you get the same problems as someone that's obese, but you get them younger and more serious because you don't have the muscle to protect you. So that's one of the challenges, but definitely can't talk about bulking up because they've just gone through a whole phase of doctors and psychologists telling them how stupid they are and that they need to, I don't care what you eat, just fatten up, you need calories, which is not true because that makes them skinny fatter.
And that's at the other side of it when you've got, there's bulimia is very prevalent as well, and that's more of an invisible illness because you can't tell with a lot of women because they don't change their body shape doesn't change that much because they're controlling with what they're putting in and what they're taking out, and that makes it a lot harder. And coming from the fitness industry, it's very big in the fitness industry because you see the bodies and you don't see what they're doing to keep that body. So they're maintaining their foundational diet, but then they're doing the binging and that sort of thing because it is a really difficult thing to maintain. And I see a lot of young girls with that issue as well. And to look at them, they look quite healthy, but they're having a lot of health issues because of it. And that's quite a hard one too because no one around them really knows what they're doing.
And this is going to sound, probably people take offence to this because they often take offence to what I say. But there's a lot of trainers and coaches and that sort of stuff out there that they make that calories in, calories out, or that calorie deficit sound so black and white that someone thinks that, I'm craving the thing, I really need it, I really want it, I'm going to have it, then they get the guilt, then they get that, and then they'll binge, and then they'll purge. And they'll think they'll be maintain a calorie deficit. What we mentioned earlier about how all the hormones interact is if you actually have a look at the main cause for thyroid problems, I'd say 80% of the people that have got problems with thyroid is that they have not hit their calories. And if you don't have adequate calories, what happens is you get these cravings, you get all these sort of things, but then also your metabolism shuts down. So your calories out is modified by the thyroid, and that's how it does that by quickly switching the T3 to reverse T3 or the T4 down that pathway and shutting down that metabolism. And it can do that in a day. It can do that in response to stress, it can do that in response to immune challenges, and it can definitely do that in response to inadequate calories.
Starvation.
And so that that's why you're saying the body composition doesn't really reflect the calorie deficit that they've put themselves in because their body will compensate with that thyroid. So it's important for people to understand that you can maintain that calorie deficit by maintaining a healthy metabolic rate and allow yourself to have those foods that you're craving. The calorie deficit is not a number that you're either above or below. It's a shifting window. And there's many factors involved in that I think is very important for people to understand. And working with a naturopath can really help. None of that's talking about you then being weak or being addictions or cravings or whatever. It's just basically listen to your body, understand that on each day it can change. There is no cut-off point between what is going to make you fat and what is going to make you lean because you know that you keep shutting down those calories and it's going to shut down, So
I think with those dietary principles, it's really coming back to where we can eat for nourishment rather than just in terms of maybe the convenience or hitting those calories or not hitting those calories. And I think as well looking at that macronutrient balance, that's something that is often lost with a lot of diets. So it's whether we're cutting out carbohydrates or we're going low fat, whatever that is, and that alone comes with its own challenges. So I think I know Nick and I, we try and bring that back to all of our consults with our clients and actually get them eating to nourish their body rather than starving it or overeating.
Absolutely, So, I remember when I was doing a lot of training, when I was running competitively, everything that I put in my body, I would think like for me, food was not really about enjoyment, and maybe that's not a healthy way to look at it. But for me, it was, what is this going to feel? What is this going to do for my cells, for my energy, for my, how much nutrients am I going to get out of it? So I used to be fanatical about, just getting all this healthy stuff in, and my body thrived on that. And I think this is what even you, Nick, would agree with. Like, if you want to compete with whatever your sport is, but if you want to compete, you have to really be good with your diet. When I say good with your diet, I'm not talking about calorie restriction and all of that. You have to be good at getting all the right nutrients in to make your body work the way it's supposed to work, so you can do the training, you can do all of that. And sometimes I think people start out that way maybe, but it's very easy to kind of then go into the pathological side where you then start to, you become obsessed. Cut up more and cut up more and cut up more. And I think that's where a lot of the problems happen, because then you get the cortisol and the muscle breakdown and the thyroid then stuffing up and all of that kind of stuff.
So I tell you, it's interesting what you're talking about, because I mean, I love these podcasts because they're always going to take these weird tangents. We're going to think of much more interesting stuff to talk about than what we planned earlier, because this is awesome. Because what I'm now realising is that as a naturopath, again, we see a lot of children that are athletes. And you were like an elite athlete when you were young and all that sort of stuff as well. So remember, we always talk about a lot of the problems that you'll have with the athletes. Talk about no hormones, because they push themselves, they don't have enough body fat. So there's a totally different protocol for an athlete, a female athlete going through puberty, and the importance of maintaining a healthy menstrual cycle for quality bone, quality cardiovascular systems, quality respiratory. The estrogen progesterone ratios are very important at regulating the respiratory tract and preventing such things as asthma and everything as well, and immunity and overtraining syndrome. So it's very important for any young athlete to work with a naturopath and look at the calories and that sort of stuff, maintain, make sure you've got adequate fats to make the hormones, but also make sure that the cortisol and the HPA axis from all this stress and training is not basically shutting down your reproductive cycle, is not a priority, because you've got that window of opportunity to develop for the rest of your life.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
So that's an interesting thing. And now with young athletes, there was a lot, and the common thing I often saw was that just that leanness and that sort of stuff, and then the hormonal problems associated with that overtraining. But when we're talking about body composition before, the other thing that I noticed that can lead to eating disorders is when you actually ask person, and a good trick is to get them to, I used to have a diagram for my massage. Next door we used to have the massage, so I used to steal the massage one and go, can you just on this diagram show me where your problem areas are? And they'll often do these big pointy things on the hips and like massive, like they got wings or something like that. And what you'll notice, and we know hormones can determine not only your metabolic rate but also your body shape. And this is the craziest pattern that I often saw, is I'll get these tiny people coming through and they would point out these massive saddlebags on their hips, and they'll hold them and they'll show me these pockets of fat that are resistant to change. And one of the most powerful tools, especially with estrogen dominant fat, and even if you've had a blood test, and I'll tell you, don't let me forget to talk about what you see on the blood test when you see these lean people with estrogen dominant fat, okay? So they're seeing this fat, and no matter what they're doing with diet and exercise, it is not budging. So when you are starving, one of the things, and you're a woman, there is potential that you could still fall pregnant. And when you're starving during pregnant, we need reserves of fat. So our body will hold on to estrogen pockets of fat for when we're starving and pregnant. Remember that led to that whole dodgy HCG diet campaign? That was dodgy as hell. They're giving pregnancy hormones. They were making people starve and giving them pregnancy hormones just to liberate the fat off the hips. So it did not work, because they were losing bulk amount of muscle on 500 calories a day or whatever. So what you'll notice, and this is the pattern that I saw a lot, when you starve yourself and when you really cut your calories down and you really exercise and push, your body will actually purposely hold on to those estrogen dominant fat that might sit on the hips, might make a love handle, sit on the backs of the arms for when you're starving and dying. The more you aggressively treat it, the more isolated they become. And as you lose visceral fat and as you lose intramuscular fat and lose everything else, these pockets become more and more isolated and more obvious. And then what used to really spin me out, because I used to look at them and go, man, it's so obviously estrogen. Like estrogen's the hormone that holds it. And I used to remember the Steggles chickens, with their delicious breasts and marvellous thighs. All estrogen, Weird stuff that blokes think of about chicken. What I used to notice, I'd see so obviously estrogen. I'd talk to them about estrogen and that holds that. And then I'd ask them about their menstrual cycle. And they didn't have any estrogen dominance. So half the time I didn't even have a proper bloody cycle. Mm-hmm. They had all this estrogen holding there. It used to confuse me. And then I used to do a test and that sort of stuff and find they're full of testosterone in their blood. Yeah. And then I go back and go, but it's so obviously estrogen, and I could never work it out. And then years later, we worked it out, because there's a thing like polycystic ovarian syndrome is basically your body stopping you from ovulating and that sort of stuff for a variety of reasons. They're very simplified versions, but you're not ovulating effectively, and instead you make a cyst. Mm-hmm. And because you're not converting the testosterone to estrogen in the ovaries, the testosterone builds up and that goes into the blood. Mm-hmm. And so the blood's full of testosterone, your blood test's full of testosterone. Mm-hmm. The brain is sending messages to the body saying, man, make some estrogen. Mm-hmm. But that's been shut down in the ovaries because you're not having enough calories to be fertile or whatever. You're overly stressed. You've got an insulin resistance syndrome that you've inherited or something like that that's caused the testosterone to build up. And because you're under calories, maybe under fat and your body fat total, then what happens is a message, the same signals that are going to the ovaries to make more estrogen gets picked up by the fat cells. The fat cells make the estrogen, but in fat cells, when estrogen's made, it's an autocrine or a paracrine hormone, meaning that it works locally inside the cell to make that estrogen fat fatter, or it releases a bit of estrogen to the estrogen fat cell next to it, so that estrogen fat gets more estrogen fat and fatter. And so what the point of my story is, people will see themselves in a mirror and see a particular body shape that they hate. They're focused on one or two particular parts of their body that are resistant to diet and exercise. It's created a hormonal profile that has actually maintained them into a vicious cycle. Now, when a naturopath can come through and then finally, the first person in the history of the world for this person has actually asked them to show them what they see. And then the first person then goes, oh, cool, I know exactly what that is. That's a stupid estrogen fat. Yeah, that stuff sucks. Look at it. It is. It's obviously, it's compartmentalized. Yeah. It's resistant. It's not changing. You are not crazy. This is not actually a dysmorphia. You are actually seeing it. Everyone else doesn't see it as bad as you because they don't understand that it's just not changing no matter what you do. And even when you're starving yourself, it seems to be getting worse. So for body composition people and eating disorder people, you can go through and understand through symptom picture, through a combination of testing and other forms of diagnosis, go through and go, I get you. And in that instance, explaining someone's symptom picture and blood test through biochemistry alone, even before the treatment, just explaining, I get it, I know what you're saying, and I actually think I know where it's coming from. And there's a series of things that we can do to address it specifically. Without just saying you're crazy, just do what everyone else does and you'll be fine. So I think that is a major thing that naturopaths do and we do all the time. There's a lot of people out there that can actually relate to the fact that, oh man, compartmentalise through hormones and we can modify hormones. So.
But I think there's something even more important that you pointed out, Matt, is that what most of us naturopaths do is we listen. I think I get that a lot. Like a lot of women just really want to be listened to, and so. If you ask them questions and you look at their whole symptom picture and you don't just dismiss what they're feeling or seeing or experiencing as in their head, because I get a lot of women who say, the doctor says there's nothing wrong, and a lot of them don't feel heard. And so I think that is one of the important things. Is like women just really want to feel heard, whatever their condition is. One of the other things I also see a lot is autoimmune stuff, especially with thyroid. I mean, I can't. You see so many people with antibodies to thyroid and all of that. Do you guys see that as well?
All the time.
All the time.
And is that because of that's a lot to do with hormones as well, isn't it? Like I also noticed that what I've noticed is that someone might come through with a fast thyroid or a slow thyroid, and when you measure the antibodies, they got antibodies for both. They got antibodies that suggest it could go fast or it could go slow, and and then they kind of hover between the two. Like, what is that? So I know that, I mean, the immune system significantly changes with pregnancies and through different stages of the life. Often you'll find a lot of autoimmune stuff either goes into remission or is stimulated through pregnancy with the massive hormonal shifts. So is that it? See, I tell you one thing, because I'm a bloke, just for everyone that's not sure. And I always have been, ever since a little girl. No, ever since I was a little girl. And so the funny thing is, as I was saying, so blokes, when you spend some time in a naturopath clinic and you talk a lot with women, so with a man, like when we go through puberty, all these things change and happen and you go a little crazy and that sort of stuff, because that's our major big shift up in hormones, that one big shift up in hormones. And then it kind of hovers between, 10 to 30, whatever the unit of measurement it is for testosterone, it hardly changes for the next 40 years. So the blokes will go up and kind of hover around there when they're stressed or whatever. Their priorities might change a little bit, but typically that's it. And then, all that puberty changes all the hair and all the nuts and all that sort of stuff. And then eventually over time that stuff just keeps kind of maturing until it starts to degrade, right? Over 50 years or something. So women are very different in the sense that when you've got your period or when you're menstruating, your hormones are almost nothing. Right? And that's why everything's falling out.
That's right.
Yes. Well, and then all within a week or so, you're getting a puberty. Like you're getting a massive spike in hormone, enough to build endometrial tissue, collagen structures, highly proliferative. It change tissues all over the body, So massive amount of changes in maybe a week or 10 days. And then you'll ovulate and get ready to have a baby. And that creates its own shift of hormones. And then 10 days or whatever after, it all just drops to nothing. And everything you made and everything you built just falls out and goes. And you start again. This is happening on like a monthly cycle. Massive, like no hormones, up to massive amounts of hormones is all happening. So there are some major shifts that are happening all within one menstrual cycle. So there is times that is so extreme that a lot of blokes can't quite comprehend that there is such amazing shifts within a month, and over and over again for 40 years. And then you get rewarded with menopause.
Yeah.
No. But isn't that, I think a lot of people need to understand that perspective. And I think if some blokes out there need to kind of understand that that's what their partner's going through or their children or their friends or whatever are going through on a monthly basis, and sometimes they do just need to talk. You don't need to give a solution as such. You need to kind of realise that everything's kind of weird and your response to stress is going to modify significantly through that cycle.
Yeah, and the last thing you should say is, it's that time of the month again.
Yeah.
You always get your period.
I think everyone
Definitely
can
don't
relate
say
to that.
No.
Okay. Well, what else shouldn't we say? This is really important.
There's a secret women's business.
Exactly.
No, this could be actually. We're going to have to do a future podcast of like tips for blokes to stay out of trouble.
Right.
Yeah.
Just have the
And that
girls
sort
and
of
we'll
stuff.
we'll
Yeah.
No,
educate.
I need these tips more than anyone. Trust me. Yeah. So, and also too, what's interesting about that menstrual cycle is what a lot of men don't also realise is that pain is quite significant in some cases, and it comes back all the bloody time. And that, along with that comes a lot of emotional sort of stuff like, oh shit, not this again, would be the least of it. It's quite painful, and then you lose that control. When you can control everyone else in your family. So you can fix your husband, you can fix your kids, you can do all this sort of stuff, you can fix a neighbour, you can fix bloody anything and anyone with a certain amount of ice, but when it comes to yourself, you just can't work out how to deal with this stuff that just keeps coming back. Now, for blokes out there that think it's not so bad, I think I've said this on the podcast before, but over all the years of having the descriptions of what period pain would feel like, which is that heavy dragging down feeling that goes up into your guts, goes to your lower back, you can get that even like sometimes in your throat, you swallow. This sounds exactly the same as when a bloke gets kicked in the nuts. Okay, so when a bloke gets kicked in the nuts and they're like, oh, like that, because it does all of those sort of that same description is like what we caught when our our outie ovaries get kicked. You know what I mean? And they're very similar in that respect, you know? Same sort of nerves, same sort of structural sort of integrity and that sort of stuff. So they're very similar style of pain and that sort of stuff. But can you imagine, as a bloke, you girls probably can't, but for the blokes out there listening to this, imagine someone just grabbing hold of your nuts and squeezing them constantly, not in a nice way, I'm talking like to hurt you, doing that for like a week, maybe more of every month. And just see how kind of cranky you'd be and whether you kind of have that urge to want to punch someone, like the person squeezing your nuts. And when that person isn't there squeezing your nuts, the next best person will do.
That's actually a great analogy.
I need to use that more often.
You'll do that. And sometimes you can actually do it as an example. You just say, look, place your nuts here. And we can I encourage any woman out there actually in some sort of a relationship who husband says, oh, you're not whinging a period pain again, or something like that, to actually use that as an example. Maybe you could possibly go to certain stores and buy these clamps. I get one. Exchange of subject.
You can conduct some research on this.
That's right. But you did make a good point, Matt, about that there is a hormonal relationship with autoimmune conditions.
Oh, that's what I was talking about. I totally forgot.
I'll be honest. It was maybe 15 years ago since I read it, so I can't remember the exact details. But I remember something about how I think this was a discussion around SLE, which is systemic lupus, right? And how there was a difference between females and males in terms of estrogen and testosterone and how they made antibodies and things like that. And it had something to do with the B cells, the immune B cells. So I can't remember the biochemistry behind it, but there's definitely, there can be relationships between the hormones and how men and women respond differently to autoimmune conditions. And I think the gist of it was that testosterone is protective in men against autoimmune conditions and estrogen is protective in women, but then the opposite is true for both sexes. Or something like that.
It kind of does make sense, you know.
Well, there's a lot more women that have autoimmune than men.
So
there is that estrogen connection there.
Well, another interesting fact then, going back to what we talked about right at the start and the common theme we're seeing, what typically precedes most autoimmunity is adrenal exhaustion. And so, as we know, the stress of the immune activity, the inflammation, whatever the challenge is, drives that HPA axis, which we said earlier, screws around with the thyroid, screws around with the gonadal, maybe does that by creating antibodies to slow down the thyroid or whatever. So as that stress axis is driven, it shuts down everything else that's not a priority. The end result would be cortisol release. Cortisol's job is to protect the host, which is you, from your own defense mechanisms, which is why when cortisol's defective, we can't control our immune system. And while that if cortisol's defective, we also can't switch off our stress axis that's responding to our immunity and our immune activation. And thereby, we can't activate the other axes back on again, the gonadal axis and thyroid. So we get this big mishmash, which could go back to the fact that the stress axis is already overburdened. The stress axis is already being depleted. And in my experience, we talk about 5 or 6 different stages of adrenal dysfunction. Most, I'd probably say 80% of the female clients that I had were hovering between stages 5 and 6. We're even in a phase of hyperreactivity where the adrenals are like an overflowing cup, or you just got too much into your cup and you just can't stop, or that cup is empty. And you're getting exhausted. But because it's overreactivity is what creates the burden, and that's what creates the exhaustion. As soon as you fill man, it drives me crazy. As soon as you fill a woman's cup back up, she's catching up on chores. Or going back, I've had a lazy week, I've got all this shit to do. And then all of a sudden they're like cleaning windows and stuff. I said, what the hell? Finally, you were complaining chronic fatigue syndrome last week, and now you're catching up on chores and you're going to be exhausted again. So I find that, again, we go back to that stress axis and the need for women with all of the roles and stuff they got to find that balance on their stress axis so that other parts of the body become a priority.
Absolutely. And the whole adrenal thing, now that we know like how it affects your thyroid and the cortisol and your your ability to lose weight and things like that, I guess I want to ask you guys, apart from having to juggle so many things, what are the other common things that you find in the female population that triggers this chronic stress? Have you found anything else as well that would trigger this?
I think, Elizabeth, it really comes back to what I see is what is our perception of stress? And I think that is something that we, I try to really talk about with my clients as what in your daily life and your daily activities do you perceive as stressful? And more often than not, it's almost everything that's happening in their day from the moment they wake up and they're stressed about getting ready. They're getting the kids ready, they're getting the family ready, they're then trying to eat a nourishing breakfast. That's stressful. They're then maybe getting in the car to drive to work. They perceive that as stress. Then they're trying to do a 9-10 hour day at work and being everything that they can be in their career and all of those things. So when you think about how often maybe that stress axis is activated, it's non-stop, and I think that's where people then fall into this category of going, well, that's just how it is, and women just seeing that is just how their life is flowing now. So it's our perception of stress, I think, is really a big thing. But I also think in terms of environmentally what's happening around us, so I find women can take on then a lot of others, so they can have that transference of emotional stress and from family, friends, whatever that might be. So and then even looking on a bigger scale in terms of environmental toxins and chemicals and all of those sorts of things. So what we're exposed to, that's a stress on the body.
And may even be exposed to, I shouldn't say more, just different, like we've got all the cosmetic chemicals and that sort of stuff that women may be exposed to more. So with all of that stress, like if I, as a husband, saying settle down, don't overreact, that's helpful, right?
Completely.
No. You know what is helpful is the husband washing the dishes, giving his wife a foot massage, something like that.
These sound like terrible ideas. Surely these things can be medicated. Is there a supplement that I could recommend instead? Maybe I'll pay for you to go see a naturopath. You know what I mean? But I'll probably, it's a team effort,
But I think, Nick, you also brought out a good point, because it doesn't always have to be family stress. You mentioned you had adrenal issues and stuff from overtraining.
Yes.
So that's a stress as well, isn't it?
I mean, we see different types of women with different types of stress. I mean, we have women who are just physical stress. A lot of time that's the younger generation, and they're out and they're doing the training, getting fit and that sort of thing, and then that becomes an overtraining issue, and that's when they have the adrenal issues. And then we have the mothers come in, and obviously they're doing everything and working full time at home, and working full time looking after their husbands and all that sort of thing. And then we have the women who are in their 40s going into their 50s who might be retired, but then they're going through menopause, and so then there's that stress with that physical stress again, and that's sort of a bit of a combination of everything. They've had the emotional stress, environmental stress, physical stress, and it's all bundled into one. It's been building up for the last 10, 15 years. And then they have this added thing of transitioning again to another stage, and that's a stress in itself.
It is. What is menopause? I mean, if we consider...
It's not a condition, I'll say
No.
that. It's not an illness. It's literally just a transition. It's literally like,
it's a transition from the ovaries to the adrenals.
Exactly. And that's where I find trying to get that point across to a lot of women, and I like to sort of get women in their early 40s, even younger, and say, okay, we have to get this under control now, because when you do transition, you're going to have a lot of trouble if you are maintaining this stress all the way through, because your adrenals are then going to have to take on all the load of what's going on now, plus producing hormones, and it's going to create a lot of issues. So
it's the same stuff.
I
mean, the adrenal gland is going to use the same raw materials to either make cortisol, that's going to help you deal with life-threatening stress or just daily stress, or it's going to use those resources to make such things as DHEA and that. Coming into menopause, a lot of the symptoms of menopause, it's not actually from the deficiency of hormones. It's from, we mentioned earlier, during puberty, we want to know what follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone are doing. Well, in menopause, when the follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone from the brain are yelling at these old-ass ovaries to make some bloody hormones, and they're not listening, it's those chemicals that induce a lot of the hot flushes, the night sweats, and a lot of those symptoms, not actually the deficiency of hormones. So that's an indication that the brain is yelling at the ovaries to make the hormones, and they're not responding. And so basically the brain is yelling at the ovaries, they're not responding, but the adrenal gland is also busy making cortisol and not responding by making DHEA, pregnenolone, progesterone, testosterone, estrogen. So the preparation for menopause is, like we said, right from puberty, right from the start. It's this stress burden and the overreactive behaviour. The way that we get resistant to cortisol is when I was talking about overreactive behaviour, meaning that when we have a stress response, cortisol's released. Cortisol tells our brain we've had a stress, chill out. If you get another stress, and then the phone rings, and then bills to pay, and then he wants a blue plate, and all that sort of shit, then it just builds up until you become resistant to cortisol, where normal levels of cortisol don't switch off your stress response, and you get stuck in that mode of hyper-reactivity, not overreacting to stress, but hyper-reactive cortisol response to stress. And that adds all this burden. You do that for bloody years. How the hell is your adrenal gland going to be able to have the resources to make all that cortisol plus everything else? And a typical thing, I'll come in and say, geez, I've lost my bum and I've got a belly. And that's a common thing for menopause. As the hormones drop but the cortisol stays high, they preserve fat around their gut, and they don't have enough hormones to maintain that booty and those quads and that sort of stuff. So that's a common body composition shift as well. Again, another symptom picture or observation we can make to get an idea of what's happening with the hormone profile without even doing a test.
And we do see a lot of those women that come in that are in that perimenopausal stage, and they come in and say, I just can't lose weight, and I'm angry or I'm upset all the time, and I don't know what's going on.
And that, autoimmunity. Around menopause is when all the autoimmunity kicks in, because the adrenals and all the other gonadal hormones. Hormones, as a general rule, are anti-inflammatory, and they also modify the immune system. So as those hormone load reduces, inflammation increases, and that's all aspects of aging are inflammatory.
Absolutely. One of the other things that I've also found can be a major stress with women is PTSD. I've actually had a few where very traumatic divorce, and all their problems, they've had all their problems since then. Some they even abuse, in their younger years. And I remember this is years ago. I had a client who went through a very bad abusive relationship. She left this was the father of her child, but she then developed PCOS after that, right? So she was that typical what we just spoken about, very skinny, but the hormonal acne. She had all the blood markers for PCOS and all of that. So we shouldn't underestimate the level of how relationships or bad relationships, I should say, or dysfunctional relationships or toxic relationships can really also affect our hormones, and then have a flow-on effect on this as well.
And that's actually something I've been really worried about during this quarantine, because in my clinical experience, the amount of people that were in those messed up relationships, and sometimes I think with a naturopath they had an excuse, they had an appointment, but it was hard because sometimes I was a bloke, they find out that I was a bloke, and then they're not allowed to come see me anymore. And so the funny thing is you had that at the moment, a lot of these people are stuck. So maybe even we might even after this podcast, we might put up, for Australia at least, for our people, put up all those phone numbers that people can use to ring up and speak. I think it's really quite freaky at the moment.
Well, I don't know if you've read the news lately, but apparently because they're trying to not have the jails overcrowded during this time, they're letting all the DV, domestic violence guys, out of jail.
No, I did not hear that.
There was a case where the guy rocked up and he was in breach of his... And
they know that they're all going to be at home.
Well,
holy hell.
This guy went to the house, and this was in breach of the... what do they call it? The AVO order. And the woman phoned the police. Police rocked up there. The guy said, well, I have to be in quarantine and I've got nowhere else to go. And the police said, okay, well, then he stays. And I'm not kidding. And I'm wondering how much more this is going to be happening. And I was talking to my partner the other day, and I said to him, I wonder how many people who've been on the verge of divorce or in the process of separating are now stuck together because... They don't have anywhere else to go.
Exactly.
So,
We've done quite a bit of work around domestic violence and a lot of groups and things like that, and still have connections with that, and seeing a lot because they're in lockdown, they can't get out, and the violence is escalating out of control. The women and the children are now in danger, so it's actually really prevalent. It's quite scary. And even going back to that autoimmune connection, that community of women that have been in domestic violent relationships have a lot of autoimmune conditions that come out of it.
And on a spiritual level too, though, with with that autoimmune, there was always that the type of people that get autoimmunity are the people that are harder on themselves than anyone could be. You notice they really pick on themselves. They attack themselves all the time, and that's exactly what autoimmunity is. The immune system starts attacking you.
And
So
you
you
look
gotta be
at
nice
a
to
woman
yourself.
that's come out of a domestic violence relationship that's been attacked constantly. You listen to her words and her vocabulary about describing herself, and she's attacks herself because she's had it for however
The
long.
words are so
thinks it's her
powerful.
And so
fault.
what's going
Yeah.
to happen physiologically is the body's going to start attacking itself.
And
as
the
well.
autoimmunity in the thyroid, which is that voice, which is
throwing out
that
to
ability,
speak up.
because this is like a switchboard. Am I going to think it, or am I going to say it, or am I going to punch it? You know?
Yeah.
Or
And
hug
I
it,
think
I suppose.
at the moment that it just shows the impact that the stress that is happening collectively around us all at the moment can even be having on women's cycles. And how often are we hearing that they're saying, my cycle has been so much shorter this month, or it's been extended, or I've had these symptoms that have shown up that I haven't had
hanging
before.
around in groups, so they're not synchronising either. They're probably trying. Because I had a thinking that. Now this is another weird thing that I think about. I think having a harem and polygamy would be hell. Because I was just thinking, can I imagine? Imagine having a room with a dozen women, all hot as hell, and you're thinking, this is going to be fantastic. You three this week or whatever, like you just cycle through. Then you realise that no, they're going to synchronise.
They're all off limits.
You're going to have a dozen women with their period all at once. You'll be the only bloke in the house. What the hell have I done?
Come to think of it.
And then there'll be a week or so before where they're like hating you anyway. So seriously, you're going to have like a one or 2 weeks of something. And in that moment, they're going to, and in those 1 or 2 weeks, they're all going to hate you because you picked the wrong one.
This could be.
right.
This could actually be a thing,
I think it's hell.
Yeah, we could actually work on this and sort of eliminate the men as we go. Just a big hair and working our way through.
I got a feeling it's
right.
not. I got a feeling that it's like a trick by you women to make us think that we're the boss. When we got all those women. But ultimately, there is no way. I don't care if you're the Sultan of Brunei. You are not the boss when you're surrounded by 15 menstruating women synchronising together. You are in big trouble.
Yeah, actually, you're not the boss even if you're surrounded by one woman.
That's right.
Yeah, well, whatever. Stupid game anyway. But I don't know how we got on that topic, but they're the sort of things that freak me out. So if I was to look at the fact that we've kind of discussed that we see a lot of women ranging from puberty through to menopause. In amongst there might be some babies and pregnancy where we palm them off. But the rest of the time, we spend a lot of time trying to manage those systems, and we've seen a massive pattern where if you can't get the lifestyle aspects right with around your meal times, the sitting down to eat, enough sleep, you can't get that balance on your adrenals, then everything else is just trying to manage hormones, manage deficiencies and that. So if I was to go around the table and get like 1 or 2 pieces of advice that you could, not talking about just supplementation, I'm talking about things that, life lessons that we may have learnt through our clinic, the things that we found ourselves saying all the time, or found that unless you got this right, nothing else is going to work. Like, you go first, because I like putting you on the spot.
Great, I love it. I would say get outside every day, do some sort of movement. It doesn't have to be anything intense. Go for a walk, get out into nature, put your feet in the ground, touch a tree, something like that. Get yourself grounded, get back to sort of, Mother Nature, because that's inherently where we've come from. And that helps you calm down. And you're getting some sunshine, getting some fresh air. So I think that's really important, even 20 minutes a day, even 10 minutes a day if you're really busy. And probably the only other thing that I think would, as a basis, would be spend at least 10 minutes a day sitting somewhere quiet, shutting your eyes, taking some breaths, and just relaxing, even if it's for 10 minutes, because women do not do that. I mean, if you say to them, just spend 5 minutes, they say, oh, no. So if you can take 5 or 10 minutes out of your day to do that, you can start to just calm down that nervous system, get back in that parasympathetic nervous system, that rest and digest. That's going to really go a long way to
and if you can't switch off your mind during that, that's where techniques help.
Yes.
Meditation, breathing, Tai Chi, even basic proprioception, just trying to make your body do things. that can actually stop you thinking about things by focusing on that body doing stuff. So that's a very good one. What's yours? What you got, Sam?
I would say acknowledging how you feel. I think, really sort of sitting down and actually seeing, okay, this is where I can start to prioritize my health and acknowledge those symptoms and things that you're feeling. I think that's a really big one for women. And asking for help, I think, because we so often want to take it on all ourselves and we don't want to give that delegation to anyone else, or we don't want to put ourselves first. I really think asking for help and seeking that support is what I'd really recommend to everyone.
Yeah.
And when asking for the help, taking it, and just try. I challenge any woman to go into a naturopath consultation and only think of themselves.
Exactly.
And at the moment you sit there and wonder, could my kids stay? Or should I buy extra for them? Or I wonder if my husband needs help. Or so that's your time focusing on you.
Yeah.
And even in what you said about understanding, like we can even supply people with symptom picture questionnaires, so you can actually see where because I typical thing that us naturopaths do all the time. Someone will come in and they'll whinge about a problem. All over the place. I got something going wrong absolutely everywhere. And we go, that's cool, that's awesome, brilliant, wicked, and then we go, and they go, no, I'm falling apart, there's just shit going wrong everywhere. And go, no, it's good, it fits a pattern. I can see the pattern.
Yeah.
And then, so sometimes people can see those, they do a symptom picture questionnaire and realise it's all part of one system.
Yeah.
And then go, of course, it's, that's why I feel like I'm all falling apart, because it's kind of better than having one broken bit,
Exactly.
What's yours?
Well, mine is pretty much that you can't be everything for everyone, and that's what you need to kind of realise. It's okay to say no. It's okay to say, look, I just don't have the energy to do that, so I'm not going to do that. It's okay also to let the little things go. You don't have to mop the floor twice a day. You don't have to have the clothes folded perfectly in the house spick and span neat. If you don't feel like cleaning the house that day, then go lock the door, have a bath, have 10 minutes mum time with a book and stuff like that. It's very important to take care of yourself and not try to be perfectionistic, because you'll just run yourself in the ground. So that's probably the best advice that I can give.
And we talk about women's intuition and that sort of stuff. Respect it and listen to it. If your gut's saying stop, if your gut's saying don't go to that thing, then blame quarantine, stay at home. I've been prepping for this for years. Oh, sorry, I can't do it. Quarantine, yes. Mine was, one thing I found myself saying all the time was, sit down to eat, okay? But like we were saying before, it's not just a matter of sitting down to eat, it's trying to actually eat and digest and focus on those little moments, because you're going to be running ragged all day. There are a couple of moments where we actually do have the ability to get out of stress mode, and we need to be mindful and we need balance. So in those instances, sitting down to eat and our meals is one thing where we don't use our stress nervous system, we use our other nervous system. So focus on that, whether you need to do a meditation or a grace or a positive affirmation, or just have the family back off and do their thing and the family work together to make sure mum at least gets to enjoy the meal that she prepared for everyone. Very important. The other one, I used to find myself all the time saying, go to bed early, you desperately need more sleep. And the mums are saying, but that's my time. Once I finally get everyone down, that's my time. And I can relate, like even a little bit of moment to myself, like half an hour flicking through Netflix trying to find something to watch while I play with my phone. I mean, like that's my me time, and I can't find anything, so I just go to bed. But that's commonly a thing. So the mums will go, no, I can't go to bed early because it's only between 11 and 12 that everyone else is in bed, and I get to be quiet, I get to sit, I get to be drunk or whatever, So my advice has changed. Get everyone else to bed earlier. So get everyone else to bed earlier, and then take your time then, but you need to sleep and eat.
It's like, but it's very important what you said, Matt. It is literally just taking moments out of a day, like the meal time. Take little moments out of the day that you just pause and stop and breathe.
Mums don't often even take time to poop properly. They can't even sit down and have a poop without someone talking to them at the door, or the moment mum leaves the room, they're all fighting in another place, or the dad's yelling out, where is the something, And now, I won't talk about that. No, I will. This is a little issue I've got with women, all right? And in particular, my wife. She does do all the work. Like, she does everything. So technically, she would know where everything is. So why would I
know where this
look
is going.
everywhere around the house? Why would I look everywhere around the house for something before I ask, hey, do you know where this is? So, just saying, if your husband, look, man, everyone's just staring at me.
We're just waiting to
So I'm just saying that if your husband happens to say, hey, do you know where this thing is? You could just say, I know where it is, it's here. You don't say, it's in front of you. Have you looked everywhere before you ask me? No.
Do you think that possibly we do that so that you're out of our face for a while, where you take your 3 hours trying to find the scissors that are on the
actually,
table?
It's possible.
Yeah.
That's possible.
true.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's true.
And then you know what the other stupid thing is when people say it's always in the last place you look. Because once you find it, you're not going to keep looking. Like, just say it's always going to be in the last place
Yeah, it
you look.
is.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to find it and go, I did have 2 or 3 other places in mind. I will go and just quickly look to see if it's not there. So anyway, just a thing, or just a little bit of advice for women out there to reduce your stress at home. Maybe I could be in trouble. All right. No, well, on that dead note, we could probably wrap it up today. And I want to do more of these. I reckon it's going to be really fun because I reckon we can get a lot of really cool stories. A lot of people help. And even just today, man, it kind of changed the way I thought it was going to go.
Yeah.
It kind of went to a totally different place of, like, I didn't expect it to be so much about the adrenals and just really understanding the burden that the people put on the body and how important it is for balance, especially with women, you know. So I think that's really cool. We need to do a lot more of this.
Yeah.
I think so too.
I think we can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you guys heaps better than Steve and Jeff. I kind of suck as a host, so I think Jeff would be really good to be back in it, but I think we'll be all right. So, well, I think that's us for today and from them. And anyone else, any last words? Anyone want to say anything in particular that we didn't miss, that we missed out on something?
No. I guess, you know, if you're listening and you want us to talk about something specific, you know, let us know. And we'll
So we can
tell
do
us what
consults. So if you go to our webpage, we do consults through over the phone, and we, like I said, we got these big symptom picture stuff that we can provide you with a lot of tools, a lot of other information and that sort of stuff there through our web stuff. We'll also advertise all the other helplines that you can ring up, where you can get real proper help if you need it, delivered to your door, you know, in the form of police or something. So we'll provide you with all that sort of stuff, because it's a very important time that we all look after each other.
Exactly.
But in particular, women have that nurturing ability, but also you're the healers of the world, really. Chief medical officer of every household, guaranteed. But I think it's very important that we all work together, and I think little things like this could be really helpful for a lot of people. So we should do more, especially while everyone's locked in and not relating to the people they're locked in with.
That's right.
Oh, well, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Awesome.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.